Hello, good morning, and welcome to this very special Waterstones event. My name is Scott Evans, and you may know me better as the reader teacher. And that's because I'm a primary school teacher, but more recently I've been getting reading and authors into schools through my website, creating content about children's books on my YouTube channel, and judging book awards. But enough about me, because today we're here to celebrate all things magical adventures with four of my favourite authors, who I'm sure will also soon be yours. They are coming together to talk about their very latest books, which I've got here on my book stand. Please also use the Q&A feature on screen to ask them your questions, as we'll have time for them during the chat as well. And if you haven't read them yet, well, I am jealous of you for getting to read them for the first time. The authors are Richard Pickard, author of the funny, or should I say punny, and fantastically fishy debut novel and Times Chicken House Chairman's Choice Award 2019 winner, The Peculiar Tale of the Tentacle Boy. B.B. Alston, author of debut middle grade novel Amari and the Night Brothers, which is one of the most magical starts to a supernatural series you'll read, and is also soon to be a major movie, so look out for that. And Team Trains, that's M.G. Leonard and Sam Sedgman, co-authors of Danger at Dead Man's Pass, the fourth and most recent book published just at the end of September from their major mystery Adventures on Trains series. Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
How you doing?
How are you all?
Good, pretty good.
Very well.
Good. Just to give us a little bit of context, where are you all signing in from today?
I'm in London. Hello.
I'm in Hertfordshire.
I'm in the States, South Carolina.
An early start for you then, Vivi?
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm in Brighton on the south coast.
Wow. I've already spoken a little bit about your books, but without giving too much away, can you just give us a little bit of insight into them, and how would you describe them to people maybe who have read them before, who haven't read them before?
Who do you want to go first? Shall me and Sam start with Trains?
Yeah.
Well, we're a bit of a giveaway because the series title is called Adventures on Trains. And in our series, you're never going to guess what happens. There are adventures that happen on trains.
Can you kind of let us in a little bit about where these adventures are as well, mate?
Sure.
Maya and Sam.
It's no problem. So there have been 4 books in this series so far, but they are all standalone adventures, so you can read them in any order. And every book in this series takes place on a different awesome train in a different country, a different part of the world. So our first book, The Highland Falcon Thief, was set right here in the UK. The second book, Kidnap on the California Comet, was set on a journey all the way across America. Our third book, Murder on the Safari Star, took place in South Africa. And our most recent book, Danger at Dead Man's Pass, takes place on a trans-European railway adventure deep into the Harz Mountains of Germany.
And they're all so exciting as well. And what about you, Richard? Where does yours take place?
Yes, my novel's The Peculiar Tale of the Tentacle Boy. It's a quirky and funny adventure set in a very strange seaside town called Merlington, where everyone is utterly obsessed with fish. It's all they learn about at school. It's all anyone does for a career. They're fishmongers or they're fishermen. And that's the setting, and the main character is a girl called Marina Minnow, who finds this all incredibly dull. So she instead loves to tell stories to make life a bit more interesting, which manages to rub some people up the wrong way. So she sets out to prove she can have a real life adventure by rowing across to the abandoned haunted pier. And that's really the beginning.
And you, Bibi, what about Amari?
Maria, she's set in Atlanta, where I spent some time growing up. Found a 12-year-old girl. She's desperate to find her missing older brother, who's been missing for 6 months. In order to find him, she tracks him down to this secret, mysterious summer camp, where she finds that mysterious, supernatural creatures are all real, and they're kind of living among us. In order to kind of qualify for that spot, she has to take these tryouts against kids who've known about the supernatural world their whole lives. And even more than a story about like magic and all those fun things, this is a story about a girl learning to believe in herself and kind of learn to accept herself too. Yeah.
And that kind of segues in nicely as well, because I think with Amari as your main character and Marina as yours, Richard, and Hal as yours, Maya and Sam, I really think that they kind of have a little bit of similarities between them. I think that they tell their stories in really kind of warm, engaging ways. And they're also quite headstrong in their personalities as well. And I wondered, can you kind of talk to us a little bit about them in detail and did they take long for you to find their voices, or did they come fully formed to you?
Who do you want to start? Should we start?
Just chime in.
Sure, okay.
Go on, Sam.
Well, I mean, so we didn't tell you about our main character. Our main character in our stories is an 11-year-old boy called Harrison Beck. And he goes on all of these adventures with his amazing uncle Nat, Nathaniel Bradshaw, who's a travel journalist who invites him on all of these amazing railway adventures. Hal's a detective. These are detective stories, so there are crimes to solve. And when we started thinking about who Hal was, we started by thinking about every detective that we love has a special power or a special skill that makes them particularly good at solving crimes. And so we thought long and hard about what this thing that Hal can do is going to be at the heart of who he is. So we decided to make Hal a really good artist. He's really good at drawing. So his ability to draw sketches of the things that he sees out the windows of the train on his travels and of the passengers within the trains. These capture really important information about the crimes that he finds himself involved in. So Hal's a very observant boy, and that's kind of how we decided, that's how we sort of started to find his character. You know, he wasn't going to be a gung-ho hero dashing into danger. He was going to be a more curious, maybe slightly shyer, more observant kind of character. And that's kind of where we started to find him. Because we write together, often, you know, a lot of what we do is talk an awful lot about something so that we agree on it, so we know that we both have the same idea in our head. And that was kind of where we started in the process, wasn't it, Mary? Was who is Hal and how is he going to go on these adventures?
And what about Marina, Richard?
Yeah, well, Marina, like you say, is very headstrong, and the starting point for her really was this ability to tell stories, because the whole book is threaded with stories the whole way through. Marina's stories, and then William, the tentacle boy's stories. And she tells stories because she's bored of this life in Merlington, but also because it's something she grew up doing, telling stories with her father, who's since gone missing. So that's another really important part to her character. She is one of the few people that still has hope he's still out there somewhere. So she tells stories to keep her optimism alive and to keep hope alive that he's still out there. And they get more and more brilliant and bizarre as they go along, whether it's a pod of dolphins has rescued him and dropped him on an abandoned island, or he was caught by a French fishing trawler and is now working off the deck at a cafe in Calais. So all these stories keeping her hope alive. And yeah, so then when she's challenged by one of her friends, Wendy, over her stories, Wendy thinks she's a bit more of a liar than a storyteller. That's when Marina really is sort of fired up and decides she needs to prove that she is more than a storyteller. She can have an adventure. So yeah, that's her driving force in the book, really.
And I read something for you, Bibi, that Amari did pop into your head one day. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started the story, it was just I had kind of promised myself I was done writing. I had moved on to kind of study for med school, and so I was really just working on the world. I thought this cool world, like what if like the Men in Black world existed, but it was like all supernatural creatures. It wasn't just aliens, you know. And so I told myself I wasn't gonna write a story, so I was just kind of playing around little featured parts of the world, like kind of creating. Okay, what would this bureau do? What would this department do, right? And then Amari just kind of popped into my head one day, and I knew she's kind of a kid from my background. I knew how she sounded, how she thought, and I realized that I had never seen a character from like my specific background, and so that was kind of exciting. And I said, so well, now that I have this character, I have this world, I got to kind of put them together and make a story. And I think I like Amari because she's resilient. She kind of had the same kind of same thought processes and emotions I had at that age. I was kind of the poor kid that went to the science camp on the richer side of town. And so kind of feel like you don't measure up to other kids, and, kind of learning to accept yourself and kind of learning to, believe yourself despite those differences. I think Amari does a good job of kind of overcoming that, and hopefully that comes through in the story.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you hit on a really important point there about seeing yourself in books and feeling represented. And I kind of get a glimpse that authors maybe see themselves in their main characters, or maybe a character throughout this story. And I just wondered, is that the case with your characters as well? Do we get a kind of glimpse of you in them? Is Hal like you, Maya and Sam, or is Marina like you, Richard, and Bibi and Amari like you, Bibi?
I think so. Obviously, every character you create from your imagination has got some of you in it. Even the really horrible, evil, bad ones have got a bit of you in them. But I do I tend to write male boy protagonists because I've got sons, and my sons are what people would always term reluctant readers. So I've always spent my years as a mum searching for books that would capture their imagination and encourage them to read. So I tend to create male protagonists, and they do tend to be, initially, when they're two-dimensional flat characters, modeled on my sons. So I'm very rarely in a protagonist that we create or I've created in the past. However, a lot of the character parts, the walk on, walk off, eccentric, strange, peculiar, there's lots of me in lots of them. But if I were to pluck one character from the Adventures on Trains series that I think I'm probably most like, it would be Lenny, who is the sidekick in Highland Falcon Thief, who's a girl who embraces things that are traditionally seen as boy things, and really doesn't want to be pigeonholed in any kind of a way, and will do exactly what she wants, whether she's allowed to or not. And that's very much my kind of essence, I think.
And that said, our books are kind of about, we're a writing partnership, but they also are about a partnership, and that Hal goes on these adventures with Uncle Nat. And we often get asked, do we like our characters? And the thing that we always say is that Maya is more like Hal and I'm more like Uncle Nat, because she has this wonderful childish enthusiasm for things, and I'm really excited about trains.
Also, I knew nothing about trains when we started writing.
And actually our illustrator, Elisa Paganelli, who does amazing illustrations throughout the book, had never met me when she did the illustrations for the first few books, but her images of Uncle Nat look exactly like me. So it's like I'm in my books, but I don't know how intentional that is.
Yeah. What about Marina, Richard? Is she similar to you?
Yeah, she definitely has characteristics of mine. We're both quite headstrong, we're both quite stubborn and don't like to be told when we're wrong about something. So she's definitely got that from me, I think. But her best friend Edie as well, I think, is quite similar to me. She's the one standing on the sidelines, rolling her eyes and sort of telling Marina she's like ridiculous and doing stupid things. So that's kind of, Edie's kind of the voice in my head telling me that I'm doing those stupid things when I'm being Marina. So they're kind of a nice sort of mixture of me, I think.
And I kind of like to move on as well to like the magical worlds, because I think the characters and the settings kind of go hand in hand in your stories too. And I just wondered, kind of as writers, how important is the place of setting in writing for you? And maybe can you share some of the tips and world building processes you go through? And maybe any, like I said, any tips really for any would-be writers watching this as well? Phoebe, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So for me, a lot of the world is just like, me sitting down and thinking, what would be really cool in this situation, right? And that's kind of really how so much of the departments came out. I was just kind of breaking up the monotony of just all that studying and just kind of having fun. But I think if I had any one tip, it would say that I guess I would say to, besides have fun, which is always the best part, is just kind of have something that grounds the setting, so that because the reader has to relate to the setting in some way. They have to see their own world in some way. That's the only way they're gonna be able to relate to it, and you don't want to have a world where everything is just beyond them. They're like, what's happening right now? So yeah, I would say have fun and make sure just to have some aspect that grounds the world, especially a fantasy world.
Do you find as well, because I found that in the books as well, there's fantasy elements, but there's a lot grounded in sort of real life issues, like with Marina trying to find out about her kind of family history. In Adventures on Trains, there is that bonds between Nat and Hal and Uncle Nat. And then with Amari, obviously, then you've got kind of being kind of poor, black, but also being up against privilege as well. And I just wondered, do you think consciously about those real life issues within the fantasy worlds as well that you create?
For me,
yeah, Richard.
Yeah, for mine it came quite naturally. I didn't set out to sort of have an underlying moral in particular. That's something that sort of developed naturally and then was expanded on in the editing process and that sort of thing. But I think it definitely helps to have a grounding in reality, because you want to be able to relate to the characters and be able to put yourself in those shoes. And then the magic elements just help sort of bring that out, really. They're sort of a nice tool to create the humanity in it, really.
Setting is really...
Go on,
Oh, sorry. I was going to say setting is really at the heart of our books, really, because every book is set in a different country. And so when we're coming up with the premise of the book, we start with where it's set. And most of the time, what's happening in our books is Uncle Nat is introducing Hal to this new place, to the wonders of travel, the wonders of different countries and the cultures and experiences that you can find there. He's teaching them how to be a good traveler. So their bond as characters is really rooted in the setting and the act of travel. And when we sit down to write a book, we often start with the setting. We start by doing an awful lot of research into the real world and saying, okay, well, you know, because all of our books are set on real trains, real journeys that you can actually take. We think, okay, well, let's look at South Africa. Let's look at Zimbabwe. You know, what is in these places? What are the things that we can take from these places that make a naturally good narrative or story? And so the story all builds from the real research that we do into the railways and the history and the places that we're writing about.
With the latest one, Danger at Dead Man's Pass as well, Mayor, was it sort of like a conscious element of thinking about how Hal can overcome things like language barriers? Because there's obviously lots of kind of German being spoken and things like that in this as well.
So we, obviously, there's a lot of books in this series. We're producing them every 6 months. And there are some incredible journeys that are in countries with complex language differences. And we knew we couldn't start the series with those books. And I still remember, and I'm pretty sure that it's quite a formative experience in most people in Europe, at least, life when they're a kid. The first time I went to France on a school trip, I was about 11. I'd never really conceived of feeling so alien and disconnected in a place that looked so much like where I lived, like different currency at the time. It's before the euro, you know, different currencies, different languages, everything written differently on signs, and suddenly feeling utterly disconnected and disorientated. And that was something, because Danger at Dead Man's Pass is our spooky Halloween, scary curse story, that whole kind of sense of disconnection and not being able to understand the people having conversations in the room around you, we thought would be a wonderful match to the tone and the journey of this. But we knew it couldn't be book one. We knew we had to start with English language speaking territories, for children to be able to kind of grow with the characters and embrace the difficulties of a different language. And it's also the book in which we introduce codes and ciphers, because obviously I think if young people view languages like a code, they're much more inclined to want to learn the languages and embrace the differences, because it's exciting to decipher a code and work out what's being said. So we tried to kind of match all of that so that all of our books are a journey, but hopefully one that they're not magical revelations, but they are real. Like if you take this journey to Germany, you will hear some of these words and feel the same way as Hal, even if there isn't a spooky family curse.
Did you kind of find challenges in writing your settings as well, Bibi and Richard? I know yours, Richard, you've got that element of wordplay and puns coming into it, and I just wondered, how on earth did you think of all of those as well?
Well, the puns for all the fishmonger names, like the mullet over and the no place like home, that really came from me. I've found many places like that in my life. The Codfather Part 2 was one of my favorite fishmongers, because the Codfather was further down the road, and then Codfather Part 2 was just like 100 meters up the road. So that's where I got the inspiration for that. But the setting was a really important starting point for my book, because the very germ of the idea was Brighton's West Pier, which is one of my favorite landmarks in the UK. It's so beautiful, but also really very eerie as well at the same time. And I thought about who might live in a place like that, if in secret, away from the townspeople who've no idea what's happening on this pier. And once I had that image in mind, I had to think about what sort of town this pier would be in, where this tentacle boy is living in secret. And obviously the funnest, darkest idea for that was a town where everyone is absolutely obsessed with eating fish, which instantly gives that sort of danger to his existence. So everything really stemmed from the setting for me. And then once they were obsessed with fish, that's where all the names came from. Everyone in town has a fishy name. Setting was a real starting point there.
In terms of kind of the settings as well, we've touched on a little bit about the research maybe that you've said about, you've done, Sam, and your interest in trains as well. And I just wondered, is there any bits of research or facts that you did but actually didn't make it up into the books that you'd like to share possibly?
Oh my God, there's so many things that we find. We always start writing by getting together and writing down every cool and interesting thing that we can think of or have researched and putting it on a post-it note and shoving it on the wall, like this big explosion of ideas. And then we kind of order it in together. And so often there are things that fall out. Danger at Dead Man's Pass, I can't think of anything specific that we weren't able to weave in though. This one feels really, really packed. We've got, you know, we have, they go to Paris, they go to these, the Le Trembleur and the Shakespeare and Co. They take the night train to Berlin. They go to this mountain, the Brocken in the Harz Mountains, which is famous in real life for a festival of witchcraft. And it's a bald mountain, supposedly bald because the devil himself stamped on it with his hoofed feet. And that's where the witches all meet. And that's at the heart of Goethe's Faust. Faust is a really important part of our book. There's also an abandoned Soviet listening post at the top of this mountain that we managed to weave in as well. I can't think, Maya, am I being silly? I can't think of anything that we left out of this book. We really crammed it all in.
Yeah, it's pretty jam-packed. I would love to ask Bibi whether he did any kind of research into traditional kind of mythical monsters and super, like, is it part imagination or did you go into ancient myth?
Yes, it was a whole lot of research into different myths and mythologies and the belief systems, and that's kind of the real tricky part. Is you have to kind of be careful what you use and what you don't use, because, you know, what's the myth to some people is not a myth to other people. And so just to make sure you don't offend people, you have to kind of cull it, and you just got to see, okay, do they acknowledge, is it acknowledged as a myth where it's from, and that's really important. And then, man, there's so much stuff that I guess I kind of want to save for future books too, maybe. But there's a lot of supernatural stuff that and fun stuff that I hopefully get used in the next few books.
We have a similar thing, because obviously with cultures that we are exploring by train and that we're not, you know, from, we have little essays at the back of our books just explaining what is real, what is fiction, what we've invented, and try and credit as much as we can, because we don't want to take liberties with other people's culture. And it's quite interesting when you do the research, because you can become really excited by a wonderful part of somebody else's culture, but you have to treat it really sensitively. And I, particularly with kind of mythical monsters and people's kind of religious histories, where there's like incredible creatures and stories, I would imagine that's even more the case.
Absolutely.
With your interest in trains as well, Sam, how did that kind of start, and how did it blossom really into developing a series of books? How did you sort of approach the publisher with that in mind as well, and Maya as well?
So I've loved trains ever since I was growing up. I had a railway line at the bottom of my garden, and I would be obsessed with running to the end when I heard one coming and waving at the train as it went past so that the driver would blow the whistle. But I kind of filed that away as a thing that I liked doing when I was a kid, and then became a serious grown-up. And I was a journalist, I was a playwright, I wrote serious, important things. But Maya and I worked together at the National Theatre, and Maya went off to become brilliant novelist M.G. Leonard, writing her amazing series of books about Beatles, Beatle Boy. And then we were hanging out one night, and I asked her what she wanted to write next. And she had said that she'd thought of writing a series of books about trains because her sons both were obsessed with trains like I was growing up. And she couldn't find books in the middle grade space that were like actual serious stories set on real trains in the real world. And she knew that I liked trains because I had like little posters of some cool trains and some awesome vintage maps of the tube up behind my desk. So she'd done her scouting and done her research. And so she raised this idea with me, and the two of us, like, it immediately sparked this amazing fizzing, like this explosion of ideas, like which I've never had before. And we immediately became clear that we should try and write these books together. And for me, it really unlocked that amazing feeling that I'd had as a child, that feeling of joy, that feeling of excitement of being interested in this thing and this wonder and excitement. And that's really what we try and capture in these books, is the sense of joy and wonder and fun that you can have when you explore something you really love. So, you know, I'm drawing on my own childhood experiences, and Maya said before that she's, you know, writing for her sons, you know, she's often inspired by her sons. And that's kind of how the idea of trains which was not part of either of our like everyday lives when we were working together at the theatre, kind of became the linchpin of this awesome series that we write together.
And it has to be said, like when I first mentioned it to Sam, I mean, he went nuts. He started going like, there's this amazing railway in this country and we could, then there's one in Australia, and it just like, bleh, it's like he was vomiting train stuff at me. And so we sat down before we even talked to our agent about it. We sat down and we outlined the series, and without much effort, and in about an hour, Sam had like told me 10 different railways, and we thought of 10 different crimes that work with those railways. And it was really obvious that this was going to be a big series. And so we outlined 10 books before we ever started writing a sentence of anything.
It was like you gave me permission to have fun writing again. Like, because I'd never considered myself a children's author. I'd never thought of writing a book for younger readers. You know, I'd thought of myself as someone who writes for grown-ups. But in that way that I'd really been kind of denying myself the opportunity to have fun. So it was really kind of this idea like unlocked this amazing sense of joy and fun that I'd kind of been repressing for a long time. And I should even say, like, the other thing that these books are is mystery stories. I absolutely love mystery stories. I'm obsessed with Agatha Christie since I was little. I love detective fiction. And the two things went together really well for obvious reasons. And yeah, it was just a fantastic spark and explosion, and it all came together very quickly.
The makings of a good plan there. And I think as well, part of the magic encased within them, I think, is the titles as well. They literally draw you in of all the stories. And I know that as being a teacher as well, and you introduce them to children and you get that sort of ooh around the classroom reverberating when they hear them. And I just wondered as well, did they start out with those titles, or did they take some changing around and deliberating on those? Richard, do you want to start with yours? I know The Peculiar Tale of the Tentacle Boy is a fantastic title. So
you can talk to authors for hours about titles, because we don't always get to entitle our own work. I'd love to know what other people's stories are.
So Richard, you and I, because Richard and I are friends outside of being authors. We went to university together by coincidence. And I remember, Richard, you and I talking about what your book should be called.
I was definitely brainstorming with you. Well, you know, the working title for it was Something Fishy, which literally was me saying, I'll come up with something fishy later at some point. And that kind of stuck whilst I was submitting it to people and entering the Times competition, because I actually then quite liked the double meaning of it being something fishy's going on in this town, and also it's a very fishy town, so I enjoyed that. But then Chicken House quite rightly thought it was a bit silly for a book that also has sort of some weight to it as well, whilst liking it. So my editor Kezia suggested the something of the something, because obviously there's such a theme of stories running throughout the whole novel. There's chapters called Marina's story and William's story. So I really liked that idea, and then I came up with a sort of long list of titles in that vein. And then we all just sort of agreed that The Peculiar Tale of the Tentacle Boy was the winner, because I especially liked the word peculiar, which I think really conjures up a lot of imagery, and a lot of sort of feeling, which is what I really wanted from the book. The peculiar is just a really good sense of what the story's about, I think.
Yeah. And what about Amari and the Night Brothers, BB?
So Amari and the Night Brothers started off as Amari and the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. And that's what it was for the longest time. And my agent said, well, it's such a fun book. You know, that's such a boring title. You know, so we want to kind of give the reader something kind of mysterious and something kind of fun. And so we changed it like the day before we sent it out to editors for submission. And so that's kind of how it came. It came from my agent's boss. So my agent's, I guess the lead agent at the agency, she kind of came up with the Night Brothers. He said that'd be fun. I said, oh, sure. I didn't have a big attachment to it, so it wasn't a big deal for me. I know some authors have like horror stories when it comes to titles, like, oh, I really love this one thing, and they changed it at the last second. So for me, it wasn't too bad.
I always think that a book ends up being called what it should be called. Like, I have had titles that have been scrapped and I've resisted it, but then the new title has been way better. But it has to be said, with the train books, Sam is the title wizard. I have not come up with any of the titles.
I don't know how I got that reputation because I don't hate it, but I find it really difficult. But like we kind of have a formula where like the name of the train should be in it and also the kind of crime should be in it, but then not too much. And like for a while, you know, our publisher was a little bit cautious about us calling Murder on the Safari Star murder. They were like, oh, maybe that's a bit scary. And we were like, well, if you think that's scary, wait until there's a murder in the book, guys. And then it was like, what if it's death? But then it's like, well, I don't know. Like, so then, you know, and then we were going to call Danger at Dead Man's Pass. For the longest time, Danger at Dead Man's Pass was called the Brocken Barn Ghost, because Brocken Barn is the railway. And they were like, no one knows what that is or means. But we were like, no, it is what it's called. So we were very like, we're often very firm with what we want it to be, incorrectly, and then we're grudgingly told like, oh god, we just come up with good titles, and then the right title pops up. So like we whinge and complain about it quite a lot, but it always ends up fine.
We wanted the California Comet to be called Kidnap on the California Zephyr, because that is the train that it's actually based on, and Sam went on it, and it's very much an Amtrak Zephyr journey. But the publishers in America thought that Zephyr was a word that children wouldn't necessarily be familiar with, and they didn't want it on the cover of the book. Quite often, as grown-ups, we think cool words. They're actually not cool to kids because kids go, don't know what that is. So we weren't allowed to call it Zephyr, even though that is the real train. We had to call it Comet.
But that's better. Now I like it better.
It's
so like, I complained for months about that, but now I'm fine. So
it's fate. It all works out in the end.
Yeah.
You said about kind of understanding what children want as well. And I wondered, and Maya, you said about kind of writing for your children and having them in mind. And I wondered, do you ever test your ideas out on children in real life at all?
Well, so I don't, because what I realized when I wrote Beetle Boy, which was my first ever book, I had in my 20s tried to write some grown-up fiction, and it was horrible. I mean, it was like a 12-year-old trying to sound like a grown-up, and like, so using lots of long words and trying to be very impressive and emotional, and it was just unreadable tosh. And I just thought, right, I can't write, I'm not a writer. And then when I had the idea for Beetle Boy, I thought, no one's going to publish this is an insane idea. But I couldn't not write it. And when I started to write it, and it's all a narrative, it's a third-person narrative focalized through a 13-year-old boy, I realized that my inner voice, the way that I actually am, and I'm talking to you right now, I'm about 12 years old. My soul is that of a 12-year-old. I find poo hilarious. I've got a very scatological sense of humor. I delight in the ridiculous. And to be honest, I don't think I could ever write anything for grown-ups because I am 12. And so, you know, for me, I don't really need to try out stuff on kids because I am a kid. But I do listen to my readers. So when I meet them at events and we talk about what they like and what they don't like, I listen to everything they say, because kids do not lie. They'll tell you if something's a bit boring. They'll tell you what they love. They'll tell you what they found the most magical or the most exciting. And I always squirrel that stuff away, and I make sure I'm delivering on that when I'm doing a manuscript. But yeah, I am a massive kid. Sorry.
Are we all kids at heart, really, Richard, Phoebe?
So for the first book, I didn't test any ideas on kids. There weren't any kids around to test them on. But with the second book, I'm getting a lot of feedback. A lot of kid readers are messaging me on Instagram or Twitter with something that they love, and you know. I know my editor like don't read it. But I think you know, just kind of seeing the kind of what in the book that they care about, what's important to them, and making sure I kind of address that in the second book. So that's where I've kind of had it.
Yeah, same for me. All of my friends' kids and my niece and nephew, they're all still too young to really be reading middle grade. But I've got lots of friends who are teachers, and even Sam read some very early chapters years ago. So yeah, lots of help in that respect. But also really, I was writing the book that me as a child, me as 10 years old, would have loved, because I loved Tim Burton and fairy tales and all that sort of stuff, Roald Dahl. So really, it was written for me, really.
And you was talking about Tim Burton there as well, and I was going to say, like, the reactions and the reviews you've had, they kind of draw those comparisons between Agatha Christie, as you said, Sam, and Harry Potter for you, BB, and Tim Burton for you, Richard. And I just wondered, what have you seen? Because I know you haven't really met readers in person as much as you would like to, but what's been your favorite reader reaction so far?
Goodness, I mean, so for me, like, you know, we had sort of 2 glorious weeks after the first book came out before lockdown happened, and then you know, we've been imprisoned in our houses, so I haven't had many opportunity to meet readers. But for me, what's interesting for me, and this kind of carries on from the last question about like, where does this childlike voice come from? One of the best things for me is when we've done some festivals this summer, is when families come up and they're telling us that they read the books together. And like the dad is going, oh, he really likes it. We read it every bedtime. I'm like, does only he like it? I think you like this too. And for me, that's one of the lovely things, is that, like, you know, I've got on this journey of like, I had this thing that I liked as a child and I thought I had to put it away and not play with trains as a grown-up. But now I've given myself permission to do that. I have a tremendous fun, like just liking things that are really fun and that I find interesting. And so it's been wonderful to share this with families who have enjoyed reading these stories together, and like you know, the parents have enjoyed like the books almost as much as the kids oftentimes. And me and Maya both tell the story about how, like, you know, we both, in both of our families, you know, we've spent a lot of our growing up times like going to heritage steam railways. Like, I was taken to steam railways across the UK by my family a lot, and that's something that happens in Maya's family as well. And so, like, for me, steam trains and travel as well is often something that you do as a family and something that you do together, and it can create this wonderful kind of intergenerational bond. And so it's wonderful to see that repeated in like the way a lot of, you know, parents and teachers, whatever, you like, read books to and with children, which is kind of at the heart of our stories, really, which is Uncle Matt and Hal traveling together. Like, so that's been the loveliest thing for me, is seeing that kind of made flesh.
I think for me, there's a big twist in the book. And just seeing like readers' reaction to the big twist at the end, like they'll write me and they'll be like, "Oh, why?" And I know it's so bad that, you know, kind of, you know, rejoice in that, but I guess it just lets me know that it worked, you know, and that, you know, they felt they cared enough about the characters for the twist to matter to them. So I think that's probably been the most gratifying to me.
Yeah, and for me, I've loved anyone that's mentioned Tim Burton in the same breath as it is wonderful, because that's really like a dream come true. And also the Erie on Sea, Thomas Taylor novels, people have been talking about that, obviously, with the sort of weird seasideness of it, so that's amazing. One of my favorite stories was a dad told me that he was reading it with his daughter sort of at bedtime, like a few chapters a night, and then one night he came to read it with her, and she finished it during the day because she couldn't wait for the evening, and then he read it on his own the next day to sort of catch up with her because he needed to know what happened as well. So yeah, things like that are really lovely.
That's adorable.
Oh, just the best, that is, yeah. And I wondered as well, kind of, you said about the Erie on Sea connections, and I think a lot of the connections that and the comparisons you've gained as well have become through the covers of your books and the illustrations, both on the outsides and the insides as well. There for the illustrative talents of Eliza Paganelli, Brittany Jackson and Maxine Lee Mackey, and I do really think that they capture that essence of magic within your writing. I just wondered, can you remember what they were like when you saw them for the first time, and the emotions they brought up in you as well, and how it feels to see your worlds realized in those ways too?
Yeah, well, this is my cover, absolutely stunning. The first time I saw it was about a year before it even came out, which was so early. I thought it would be much closer to publication before I saw anything like that. And I was expecting like a very rough pencil draft that was sort of barely there, but it came in fully formed. And so I was absolutely blown away by that, expecting something much more early. And there was only maybe sort of 3 or 4 drafts by the end, so it didn't change too much, but it instantly just summed up everything I wanted about the book. But I think it's exactly the sort of book that I would pick up to read, because I just think it's brilliant, and it's got sort of the Tim Burton-y, Edward Scissorhands vibes of William there. But yeah, Maxine Lee Mackey's amazing. Yeah, and she was one of the illustrators I sort of suggested on a Pinterest board when I was asked for some covers I liked. So when they picked her, I was absolutely thrilled, and yeah, I'd really, really love her to do as many more as she possibly can for me.
Okay, so for me, can't you see it better? And so, you know, my cover was a big deal for me just because when I was growing up, I was really into fantasy books, but I just could never find one with a black kid on it, on the cover, about a black kid. And so, just to be able to see this cover and, know that kids now, especially Black kids or minority kids, can see a cover that kind of looks like them and see themselves. I think that was really important. And I think Brittany did such a magnificent job. So I'm really happy with it.
We have to say that Elisa Pagnelli, who does our covers, she also does all the internal illustrations. And I didn't know her work before she illustrated our series, but I genuinely think she's some kind of weird telepathic witch, because we have 40 spot illustrations throughout our books, and she does them, and they're incredible. But the thing about the illustrations is, because our protagonist is an artist, all of the illustrations are what he draws in his sketchbook, and she reads the manuscript, and we do a little brief of what we think he should be drawing. But inside some of those pictures are also clues that enable him to solve it. And we very rarely have to give any feedback for changes. They're always minute. And she does 40 for every book, including the incredible maps, because we have the journey maps at the front that show the entire route of the train. So she does an awful lot of work on these books, and it is like she is Hal. She's incredible. I mean, and the speed at which she works. Honestly, there must be at least a clone factory of her, or she's some kind of telepathic witch, or I don't know what it is. She's definitely magic, but we are so blessed that she is working with us on this series. We love her work.
I love how the medium she uses changes depending on what Hal's drawing with as well, like the charcoal in Murder and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
it's so nuts that she's able to do that, because we say in every book, like, how we tell the reader that, Hal's drawing with pens in this book, or he's drawing with pencils in this book, and we kind of didn't expect that Elisa would literally change her drawing style to suit each book's slight change, but she does. Like, there are some beautiful charcoal drawings in Murder on the Safari Star that make it feel a lot more earthy because they're out in the savannah. And then Danger at Dead Man's Pass, he's drawing in sort of art pen and ink, so it's much more dark. It's a lot more kind of film noir, which goes with the tone of it. So that is beyond our wildest expectations for anything we ever thought we could achieve with an illustrator.
And also, so the new book, which we're not supposed to talk about, but anyway, I'm going to say it just because it's just her work. With the new book, Sabotage on the Solar Express, that comes out next year in February, is set in Australia. And we thought it would be a nice idea if he explored the kind of graphic novel genre of artwork. And we mentioned this in passing, and she sent over the first selection of illustrations for the first few chapters of the book, and I was gobsmacked because it's going to be so cool. So yeah, she just takes anything we suggest, and she's amazing, really amazing.
I was going to ask as well, kind of, there's lots of scenes within the book as well, and I just wondered, what's your most memorable scene from the book? And I'm guessing it's aided by your illustrations as well.
Yes and no. So there's it's difficult because I can't talk about a lot of what the scenes are because it'll give away things. There's a lot of in Danger at Dead Man's Pass, we took the journey that Hal takes across Europe together. So there are a lot of sort of wonderful moments, like where they visit this amazing restaurant, Le Trembleur at Gare de Lyon in Paris, where we went. That kind of reminds me of all those places. There's a scene where Hal's getting into disguise in Berlin. That's really fun. But in all of our books, like, the scene that stays with me, and I think the scene that stays with most readers from the series as a whole, is a scene in The Highland Falcon Thief where Hal goes on the footplate of the locomotive for the first time. So he goes on the footplate of the A4 Pacific steam engine, and Lenny, his sidekick in that kind of book, introduces him to how awesome steam trains are. And it's this beautiful scene that we spent so much time working on that really captures, like, the joy and wonder and awesomeness of steam engines. And I think for a lot of people, that's their favorite scene, and it really stays with me quite strongly.
Agreed.
I think as well, with scenes staying with you, I think that messages also within the books stay with me. And I think magic and kind of adventure are a good way to sort of put underlying morals or messages within books. And I just wondered if there's one thing that you'd like readers to take away from your books, what would it be and why? Who would like to start me with this?
I think for me, I think kindness is what I want to come through the most. the book is really about a kid who kind of feels like an outcast. You know, both at her private school where she's the only scholarship kid, and then she goes to this bureau, this fantasy place, and you know, she thinks things are gonna be different, but people are people everywhere, right? And so she still finds herself with this illegal magic, and so she still finds herself on the kind of on the outside. And I think I want the book to be, you know, just a message to people to be kind to other kids, especially if you're the kid that you find yourself in a situation where you're not like people, maybe you look different or you think different, you feel different. Just not to give up and kind of and if you're the kid who, you know, you do have the friends and you're popular, you know, you kind of reach your hand out because you see characters reach your hand out to Mari to give her that helping hand. And so I think, you know, on both sides, I hope that you know, just the overall message is to be kind, give people a chance, and hopefully that comes through in the book for sure.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, mine's very similar. I'd hope people take away a message of acceptance and individuality and being true to yourself. I've always really liked stories about these people, about outcasts and oddballs living sort of on the fringes of society, like Edward Scissorhands or the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And those oddballs are often the people that have more humanity in them than the people that they're hiding from. And so that's something that was really inspiring to me, and I hope people come away from learning that you can really find friendship and family in even the strangest places.
And I think I was going to say, I think with the Trains books, really what we want to inspire in readers is that the world is a wonderful, wonderful place. And the more you see of it and the more you learn about it and the more people you experience and cultures you experience, the broader your horizons get, and the more joy you will just experience being, because in this planet, like there's so much negative news and bad news and reasons to be fearful. And I think a lot of the joy from our books is in the traveling and realizing that, you know, not all people are bad, and places are really quite wonderful, and discovering things about the real world can bring you intense joy.
Yeah, travel with an open heart and an open mind, as Uncle Matt says.
Love it. Summed up completely. A nice question's just come in as well, because we're talking a little bit sort of about inspirations behind the book, and we've spoken really about what's been your inspirations, but Anna Chapman said, who inspired you to write your books? And I kind of like that angle. So is there anybody in your life or in your mind that comes to mind that has inspired you personally to write your books too?
So my English teacher was, I mean, a lot of writers have like the English teacher that was like the inspiration for them, and that was definitely mine. I was a really shy kid at school, and I was really kind of quite closed off, and but I loved to write, but I didn't like to share that I wrote with anyone. And then one English class I had to, you know, we all had to write a story, and my English teacher, to my absolute guttural horror, in one lesson said, I'm going to read out the best story in the class, and it was written by him. And it was like, it felt like it took like 4 hours, but I was there like, oh my God. And then, but because she did that, she basically said at the end, like, you can do this, you're really good at this, and you should try and do this. And that for me was just someone having a moment of confidence in me that kind of spurred me on to think that this was something that I could do and that I should be proud of doing. So I thanked her in the back of the Highland Falcon Thief, and delightfully, she's now a headmistress at a school, and I got to go do an event there the other day and meet her again and thank her in person. So that was a really nice full circle moment for me.
Yeah. And what about for you, Richard or Bibi?
I'd always been like tinkering with writing, sort of trying to write adult novels and things like that over the years. But it was when my niece was born that I suddenly had this brainwave that really I should be writing for children, because those are the books that stay with me all my life and really inspire me. So it was when she was born that I decided that I was going to write a book for her. And now it's actually dedicated to her and my nephew, who was born since, because it takes a long time to write a book. So really they were the catalysts for me writing.
For me, probably, so I was like Sam, I was a really shy kid. But I used to write, we used to have like private time where you can be on the computer and do your own little thing. And I used to write these horror stories with my classmates, and we always go on these field trips that went horribly wrong, and you know, not everybody made it to the end. And it was just, I think, one day somebody was like, "What are you doing?" And then one kid came over to read it, and another kid came over, and soon the whole class was there reading, and they're all excited. And I was like, wow, that was the first time I realized that, something I wrote could bring somebody else, enjoyment. And so from then on, I've kind of been a writer. So I think that was kind of like the inspiring moment where I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool.
And you said there, Richard, about it taking a long time for you to write a book, but Ben wants to know, when did you start writing? So I'll open that up to everybody.
Oh, well, I started writing 15 years ago. I started writing Beetle Boy, I think. It took me 10 years to write my first book because I wasn't a writer and I didn't really know what I was doing. And it's about insects. And for those of you who don't know, there's a hell of a lot of different species of insect. And the research takes a long time, which I didn't know when I started either. But yeah, so I've been writing for about 15 years, but I didn't write before I had the idea for Beetle Boy. I really genuinely thought that I was bad at it and couldn't do it. So it's not something I did all my life. I mostly pranced around on stages or was involved in theatre. I did a lot of oral storytelling. I love to tell stories in person. I love to perform. And yeah, I'm much more shy about my written work than I am about my gob, which works on its own.
I was much more of an arty kid. I grew up doing a lot of drawing and painting and sort of drawing my own characters and that sort of stuff. I didn't really start writing until I was a teenager. I think one of the first things I ever wrote was my own episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was great. And I wish I could find it somewhere.
What happens in it? I have to know this.
Well, it was around the time series 3 was airing. And so it was kind of, what happened? It was sort of a cult episode. There was like sacrifice and thing. And I remember, spoiler alert for Buffy series 3, in the episode I killed off Principal Snyder, and I sent it to my friend who'd moved to America, and he replied being like, "It's a bit much to kill him again." And I was like, what do you mean again? And so he spoiled Principal Snyder died for me in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So yeah, and then like I say, children's fiction came quite late, but it was when this sort of idea just came to mind, and I realized that's what I should be doing and what I wanted to be doing. And then it all came quite easily after that.
And so, like I said, I've been writing since I was a kid, but I didn't have the guts to try like a full novel until like my 30s. I was just like, well, why not? And I just kind of tried it and wrote a few terrible novels. I'll never see the light of day. And I just got better at it and said, but like I said, I didn't have success early on. I had years and years and years of no's, and then when I finally said, "Oh, I'm gonna do this med school thing," that's when I finally got a yes. So.
It's obviously kind of apparent from kind of your books as well that you love the genres of sort of magic and fantasy and adventure. And I just wondered, is there any books really that have left their mark on you, either from your childhood or any recommendations we should be reading now that you'd like to share with those watching as well?
Childhood-wise, we were a real Roald Dahl household. Like me and my brother had every single book. And so if I wanted to read James and the Giant Peach, I had to go and nick it from his bedroom, and if he wanted to read the Twits, he'd have to come to my bedroom. So that was our household. But recent times, there's been some great books. I've just read His Royal Hopeless by Chloe Perrin, which is a really, really funny fantasy adventure set in a kingdom ruled by the most evil royal family you've ever heard of. That's really fun. And also Children of the Quicksands by Efewa Traore, which is a beautiful mythical novel set in Nigeria, about a girl who discovers this strange world below the quicksands in this beautiful rural Nigerian village. Yeah, those were two of my favorites recently.
I obviously love crime fiction and detective stories, and those were I read a lot of Agatha Christie growing up because there wasn't an awful lot of middle grade focused crime and detective fiction out there. And one of the most wonderful things to see about children's books in the last kind of 5 years or so has been this extraordinary explosion in detective stories for kind of the 8 to 12-year-olds. Queen of that, of course, is the wonderful Robin Stevens and her Murder Most Unladylike series, which I've read all of and thoroughly enjoy and thoroughly recommend to anyone who wants a mystery story. And Shana Jackson is also one fantastic with her High Rise Mystery series as well. So, but there's loads of amazing detectives out there, excuse me, for that age group, of whom we are delighted to be a part of, because yeah, like growing up, I always love a puzzle. I love a mystery story. But I should just say on fantasy, like the fantasy writer who always appeals to me is Terry Pratchett. He's been a fantastic part of my childhood, ever since I was reading kind of, you know, Truckers, Diggers and Wings growing up. And then of course his Discworld series as a grown-up. Because he writes fantasy from a very grounded perspective. He's interested in fantasy and that what it tells you about the real world. And as someone who's very interested in the real world, that's why he always appeals to me.
So that book for me would probably be Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's the book I read as a kid, and I read it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, you know. Just the idea that there was this magical place in the real world that you could just go to, and it was larger than life. And Charlie was a kid I really related to. He was a poor kid, but he didn't let that get him down. He still had these big dreams, and he still wanted to get out and do things. And so that's probably my favorite book of all time, honestly. And recently I read a book by Ashlyn Fowler called Fireborn. I think it like literally just came out, and that really kind of blew me away. So if you guys get a chance to read that, I think you should.
And when I was young, I read everything, every genre. So I did all fantasy and all sci-fi, and I mean, literally everything. I was a complete obsessive reader. And the fantasy series that has lived with me forever is Ursula Le Guin's The Earthsea Quartet, which, I mean, I think I first read it when I was 10, and I've reread it several times. Ursula Le Guin is an incredible fantasy writer. And the other series that really got me when I was young, and I think really influences me as a grown-up, is the Swallows and Amazon series by Arthur Ransome, because his way of turning real life into a fantastic adventure for young people and celebrating the natural world, but not in a worthy, you will be educated kind of a way, but just as in, if you're a child that knows what the different plants are and how to like sail a boat, you're going to have a much greater adventure in your life. I think like there's a segue between those twos where I sit imaginatively. I was inspired by lots and lots of authors, but I think fantasy wise, Ursula Le Guin for me is one of the best.
Wow. And I'm sure many watching are going to take your inspirations and go and read them. I know I will. I've got one last question. And we know we've talked a little bit about some of the books coming out next year from you. And I just wondered, really, can you give us maybe a little sneak peek or a little insight or a taster of some of them, or any maybe new projects or plans that we might not yet know about from any of you?
Come on, BB, I want to know what happens next.
So Mario and the Great Game comes out next year, and she gets out of the bureau, and you get to see more about what it means to be a magician and those type of fun things. I think readers are really enjoy a lot of the answers that you did get answered in the first book, kind of get answered in the second book. So I think hopefully readers really enjoy it.
And I've just finished the first draft of my new book for Chicken House, which is another seaside-y set family mystery, but this time set at the height of summer. So there's lots of sun and sea and sand, all the S's. Yeah, so that's, I can't really say anything about it, but yeah, that's coming.
Does it have a title that you can't tell us?
It has another weird working title that will definitely probably change.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about that later because I want to know. Maya and I both have 3 books coming out each next year, which is nuts. We mentioned Sabotage on the Solar Express, which is the 5th Adventures on Trains story coming out in February next year. That's set in Australia. It's inspired by all of our favorite action movies. So it is a fast-paced action thriller set on a train, also with a mystery at its heart that Hal has to solve against the clock before disaster strikes. which is incredibly exciting. The 6th Adventures on Trains book is also going to come out next sort of autumn, winter next year. We can't really tell you anything about that, except that it's going to be in the Arctic, which should be fun. And I also have a standalone solo book coming out in February as well, called Epic Adventures. It's a non-fiction book. Epic Adventures explore the world in 12 amazing railway journeys, which is a beautiful hardcover A4 book illustrated by the wonderful Sam Brewster. That's basically me gushing about all of my favorite railways around the world and why they're cool and why all the places they go to are really amazing and interesting, and telling you how the story of the railways and why they were built kind of intersecting with all the amazing places and cultures and histories of the places that they go. So I'm really excited about that. And Maya has her own book coming out too.
Yes, so this year I had a solo project with Walker Books called Twitch, about a young birdwatcher. And the second book in the Twitchers series will come out next autumn. And I'm not allowed to tell you what the title is or anything, but it's an autumnal birdwatching book. There's a new mystery, and it deals with a lot of the types of things that happen to the birds in autumn. So we've got migration, and we've got like a change of scenery when it comes to the birds that are in and around Aves Wood. So yeah, another birdwatching adventure from me next autumn.
They all sound fantastic. I really can't wait. Before we go today, though, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Richard Pickard, BB Alston, MG Leonard and Sam Sedgman for joining me today, to Waterstones for inviting me to host this event, and to you at home or wherever you are. And we hope you've enjoyed listening in, asking your questions and finding out more about these magical adventures. So thanks everybody for joining me, and keep reading.
Thanks for having us. It was a real treat.